I did not have a very slutty early 20s. Definitely not in my teens, and not even really my mid 20s to be honest. When was the last time you had an STI?
Probably 2 years ago.
Oh, then I'm definitely way more recent than that. So
I always tell someone this. I remember when I first started uh getting tested for STIs, and but this is before they had a rapid HIV results, or because that was like the big one, right? You make sure you get HIV tested. And I remember, and regardless of if you were positive or negative, they would call you into the office and you had to meet with someone, like regardless. So, and I think I don't remember. It wasn't you didn't have to go home, but it was like you had to wait like an hour or like two. So I guess it is rapid.
do you mean you're talking about like at the clinic?
Yeah, at the clinic. I would go down to the clinic in New York, and this is in high school, and they would like, and at the gay men's health crisis, because they wouldn't take you wouldn't have to give them any information. You just have to give them like your gender, whatever, and like you would get tested, and they would. I can't remember if you went home and they call you back the next day or that same day. I don't remember. But it wasn't the quick one. Now it's in like a couple, like maybe 2 minutes. Back then, it definitely was not that. It was like a long time, either a few hours or like the next day, and they would call you back in the room either way. And before they give you a result, they'll talk to you and they'll be like, so, they'll talk to you about like how you've been having sex, about how ways to practice safe sex, blah, 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 blah. And then they give you the results at the end afterwards. But I remember like that was always like you were always sitting there like what's it was like putting knots in your stomach because they drum up this thing. And also they made HIV because for a lot of people, obviously it was a very scary disease, and especially coming out of the 90s. So they really like made you like really they like I feel like they made the a whole experience feel very arduous to kind of like scare you to have like safer sex because obviously you came to get tested because you may not have had safe sex.
I mean, I never got tested for any STIs until I was in my 20s.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't having sex like that in high school.
Got
I
it.
had like sex one time in high school. We were both virgins, and then in college, I was just not like I did not get around until I didn't really start like getting around until like my late 20s.
Getting around. Yeah.
I did not have a very slutty early 20s. Definitely not in my teens, and not even really my mid 20s to be honest. Like I really just wasn't having a lot of sex uh, up until like 30.
In my early 20s, it just felt like sex was just so accessible, just so available, especially in New York City. It just feel like sex was like everywhere, like the blue store. Like it just felt like sex was just always around, like always available.
I think people were having sex in Atlanta, and also bear in mind, I was living in New York City for a lot of this. I just wasn't very
Right.
I just wasn't sexually active in my early 20s. Just kind of, I mean, not that I wasn't having sex, just really not very often. Just like I would go months without having sex in my early 20s.
Yeah.
Months.
Early 20s. Something. Oh, Arstine and I were talking. Like, do you realize like a lot of like our songs from like high school and college, they're like people think they're not college maybe, but like high school, like they're oldies now. Like Sierra 1 2 Step, kids they call them oldies.
You know, the song's 20 years old.
That's crazy.
The song's 20 years old, Monét.
I know. I cannot believe it's that old. That's what I'm saying. Like I can't believe 1 2 Step came out 20 years ago. That seems
Well,
crazy.
I don't know if that specific song came out 20 years ago, but roughly, it came out roughly 20 years ago for sure. But I guess I've already kind of had this reckoning. There was like one or two songs where I was like, oh no, and now I'm kind of like, oh yeah, that actually makes sense. So now I'm kind of like, of course, NSYNC is an oldie. Of course, Sierra's an oldie. Yeah, this one still came out 19 years ago. Of course, the Miseducation of Lauryn Hill is an oldie. Of course, any song with all those Timbaland songs, those Justin Timberlake songs, of course they're all oldies. Why wouldn't they be like? But I guess I've already had this reckoning where I was like, oh, interesting.
But I'm trying to think like what for me in like my 2000, like what was like an oldie song? Like something that came out 20 years before that.
I said a hip hop, a hip to the hip hop, and you don't stop. A rocket to the bang bang, boogie to up
But that would
jump
have
the
been
boogie.
oldie. I would consider oldies like Patsy Cline, like songs like from like the 60s and I would feel like it's oldies.
We called 80s hip hop oldies when I was in the 2000s for sure. When I was in college, Run DMC was 100% oldies. This is not even up for debate. That when in the year 2000, Run DMC was oldies. For where I'm from, anyway.
Yeah, man, I don't think I have that experience. I mean, I also don't remember. I can't remember anything. Yeah, interesting.
I mean, you guys thought that like 80s songs were not oldies in the early. You thought that like AC/DC's Back in Black was not an oldie in the early 2000s?
I guess the language I would use, we wouldn't call it oldies. We're like, oh, it was just an 80s song because they're so representative of the time, like tonally and sonically. But I wouldn't say they were oldies. Like to me, oldies were like 50s and 60s songs, not necessarily just because, not even 70s. I would have called it oldies. It's called a disco, right? But it didn't. I wouldn't call it oldie because even though it was from the 70s, it didn't feel old. It felt like not new, but it didn't feel like an oldie. Like Patsy Cline feels like an oldie song.
That's a very interesting take. Oldie's not a genre.
I know. Well, is it? I think it is.
Oldie is not a genre.
Let's look it up.
Oldie's not a genre.
Oldies.
Like country is a genre, R&B is a genre, rock and roll is a genre, rap is a genre, hip hop is a genre.
Okay, you're right. Yeah, oldies is a term for musical genres such as pop, rock, blah, 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 blah. Yeah. Okay.
Like how would oldies be? Patsy Cline is country music.
Is it?
She didn't make oldies music. It wasn't called oldies when she made it.
But sometimes,
like for it to be a genre, it has to be that genre when you're making it. You don't make oldies in the time. Things become oldies.